Hey, thanks for making it to Veterans Info Tep. I'm glad you made it. I wanted to share with you some news that is coming out of the U.S. Senate, specifically the U.S. Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. Wanted to share this news with you, so please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, share with a friend, all that good stuff. I truly appreciate it. It really helps to get the word out so we are informed as what I like to call the veteran sphere. So we all know what's going on and we can make or we can come up with some sort of action if we need to, right? Inform our elected officials that we either support or don't support or what have you, different pieces of legislation, or just simply be aware of what's going on in our backyard. So let's jump into it here. The headline is Tester, Rubio lead bipartisan effort to expand research for descendants of toxic exposed veterans. Now, I know there are many of you out there either as the dependent or as the veteran saying, hey, what is out there for dependents or descendants of veterans that were exposed to toxins? So let's jump into this because I think that this might be interesting. It'd be nice to hear what they have to say, what sort of nuggets that we can pick out of it. And if it's something that we support, well, guess what? We need to call for action. We must reach out to our elected officials and let them know that we support whatever this is. Let's jump into it. There's kind of I'll call it a sub-headline here. Senators introduce bipartisan legislation to establish first of its kind comprehensive research into health conditions of toxic exposed veterans' descendants. Super important, I believe. So this just came out Thursday, March 14th, 2024. Okay, moving on. U.S. Senator Jon Tester, chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and U.S. Senator Marco Rubio are teaming up to introduce bipartisan legislation to expand research on birth defects among descendants of toxic exposed veterans. Named after the daughter of a toxic exposed veteran battling spina bifida, a condition related to her father's exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam, the senators Molly R. Loomis Research for Descendants of Toxic Exposed Veterans Act. It's a long one and it will be in the description. So if you support this, you want to reach out and let your senators, and I'm sure there's going to be a companion legislation on the House side at some point. But you want to know the name. And the name of it is, again, Molly R. Loomis Research for Descendants of Toxic Exposed Veterans Act. Now, this would establish a multi-agency task force to conduct research on the diagnosis and treatment of health conditions of descendants of veterans exposed to toxic substances during their military service. This research would be authorized through the Toxic Exposure Research Working Group, which was established under the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson, honoring our promise to address comprehensive toxics, the PACT Act. It's a long one too. All right, so moving on, here's a quotation. And, you know, I like to read the quotations because that is sometimes where we can pick up little nuggets on kind of where this is moving and what kind of things we can basically be prepared for. So, here's the quotation, when we send our fighting men and women off to war, we tell them we're going to take care of them if they come home changed, said Tester. The same goes for their loved ones, especially those who are now battling health conditions connected to their parents' toxic exposure during their military service. Children of veterans like Molly from Bozeman, have been fighting these toxic exposure related health conditions for decades, and our bill will rightly commission first of its kind research into diagnosing and treating their conditions, leveraging a critical research work group created by the PACT Act. Another quotation, we must continue our commitment to understanding the health challenges faced by the descendants of veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange and other toxins, said Rubio. This bill aims to empower the Toxic Exposure Research Working Group to conduct more vital research related to toxic exposure. Molly Loomis is the daughter of a U.S. Navy veteran exposed to Agent Orange during his service on the USS Ogden, who passed in 2013 from Agent Orange-related illness, bladder cancer. She served as a National Park Service climbing ranger and rescue specialist until medical conditions related to her father's exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam left her unable to work both in the field and out. When she applied for the Department of Veterans Affairs spina bifida program, VA refused to accept her condition as being related to her father's service. That's super annoying. Oh, wow. That is rough. All right, moving on. Veterans exposed to toxins during their military service are more likely to develop certain medical conditions such as rare cancers, heart conditions, and chronic lung ailments as a direct result of the toxic exposure. Descendants of these toxic exposed veterans are also likely to experience conditions such as spina bifida related to their parents' or grandparents' exposure to toxic chemicals. While there has been some research on the link between birth defects and exposure to toxins and chemicals, there has yet to be comprehensive government-led studies into the effects of toxic exposure on descendants of toxic exposed veterans. The Molly R. Loomis Research for Descendants of Toxic Exposed Veterans Act would commission first of its kind landmark research on birth defects among descendants of toxic exposed veterans enabled by the PACT Act. Veteran service organizations and stakeholders support the Senator's legislation effort to expand research on health conditions faced by descendants of toxic exposed veterans, including the Disabled American Veterans, the DAV, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, Vietnam Veterans of America, the VVA, and Paralyzed Veterans of America, the PVA. I try putting myself in my dad's shoes, any parent's shoes, and how it might feel to face toxic exposure health issues. But then, to learn your exposure could have resulted in the birth defects, disabilities, illnesses, even shortened lifespan of your own children, perhaps grandchildren too, said Molly Loomis, daughter of a toxic exposed veteran battling medical conditions related to her father's military toxic exposure and namesake of the bill. I don't think I can fully imagine the nightmare of that. Not everyone chooses to protect their country, but I'd say everyone wants to protect their children. By committing to the latest science and following through with the related relevant care, this bill would be a tremendous step toward upholding the responsibility of supporting service members and their families. The historic passage of the PACT Act brought justice to millions of our nation's veterans who were exposed to toxic substances during their military service, said DAV National Commander Nancy Espinoza. However, evidence exists showing toxic exposure can have repercussions for family members, and that's why the DAV is proud to support the Molly R. Loomis Research for Descendants of Toxic Exposed Veterans Act in order to ensure the proper research is conducted on the diagnosis and treatment of health conditions of descendants of the veterans exposed to toxic substances. We applaud Senator Tester and Senator Rubio for their leadership in introducing this important bipartisan legislation. Now, there's a couple more quotations here. I'm just going to go through them real quick. They're fairly short. The effects of the toxic exposures last long after the service member takes off the uniform. Unfortunately, sometimes family members may have some of these effects passed on to them, said the VFW National Legislative Director Pat Murray. The VFW supports this proposal, which would research the after effects of toxins on descendants of service members. We thank Senators Tester and Rubio for leading this effort. Last quotation here. Vietnam Veterans of America fully support the Molly R. Loomis Research for Descendants of Toxic Exposed Veterans Act of 2024 and thanks Senators Tester and Rubio for introducing this important piece of legislation, said the VVA National President Jack McManus. Our veterans, their children, and their grandchildren have waited far too long for answers to their health conditions believed to be the result of military toxic exposure. When enacted, this important research will provide the much needed science regarding the generalization of legacy and of this toxic exposure. So with that, thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate you. And this, I believe, is an important piece of legislation because the effects are real, and it is seen by things like spina bifida. And I think that there is this is a good bill, It's a good act. It is something that needs to be pushed forward, enacted. The research needs to happen, and these descendants need to be taken care of in some way. So with that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Truly, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And remember, if we don't take care of each other, something went wrong.